Welcome. I'm Phil Cubett. I'm here today with Patricia Angus, Esquire, and we're going to talk about family governance, which is a topic on which she's a noted expert. Patricia, the topic is family governance, those two words. At the beginning of your article, you talk about what counts as family. Why is it so important to define family when it seems so obvious?
Sure. Boy, do I wish it were obvious. And I have to remind people all the time that it's not as obvious as we might think. There's several reasons, actually, and it's something that I keep refining my views on it and my questions on it, but I always have to ask whatever family I'm working with, what is family to them? So first, families today are very different from what they looked like 20, 30, 50 years ago. Back then we had Leave It to Beaver, now we've got Modern Family. I think it's a great example. If you think of Modern Family, it reflects a lot of the families that I work with. So the nuclear family, father, mother, 2.5 children, just is not as common as it used to be. So you might have families that include partners who are not married but are living together for a long period of time. You might include non-family members who are really as close as family to the people that you're working with. And in some of the families that I've worked with that have multiple generations involved, some of their friends, their advisors, their sort of trusted people outside are sort of family to them. So you really have to recognize that each family has its own way of defining it. Number two, the law is changing in every state in the United States, and it's also all around the world. We're focusing on things like, how do you define marriage? How do you define what kind of relationship gives you legal rights and responsibilities? We cannot ignore that. We would ignore it at our peril. So we have to understand what's the legal environment that we're working in. Third, I'd say that families, in fact, and my students really enjoy hearing this, families were ahead of the law on this because families have always had to define who their members are, whether it's in trusts that were set up 100 years ago or trusts that were set up yesterday, wills, even power of attorney. You're always having an opportunity to define who is family to you. So you need to, when you enter an engagement, find out what the definition of family is that already exists. And finally, that definition might be different for every purpose. So you may have your foundation board considers family in one way versus the business is different.
And the other word, governance?
Yeah, I love that word, and it's not well understood in our culture, which makes it very difficult. I had to go back to the dictionary because it gets very confusing after a while when you hear governance used. Frankly, I think it's used for family dynamics more than it's used for the actual meaning of its word in our field. So to govern really means to guide or to steer. So if you think about it, everyone in a group has some form of governance one way or another, and thinking about who's guiding it, who's steering it, how's that done is really critical. Another quote that I love to use, and it's in the article, is that law is regulating human behavior with language. And when we, for example, make a planned gift to an organization, or when we write a trust, write even a will that has very simple dispositive terms, you are in a sense regulating what happens in people's lives through your own hand. So you really have to think about that governing and legal mindset.
What do you consider to be the scope of family governance work? What is inside it and what's outside it? What does it govern?
What does it govern? I think I once said that some things you can govern, like who's going to love whom, and there are other things that you can't govern that, and people like to do that. There's lots of the old controlling from the grave trusts and wills that I've seen in the past, basically defining how people had to live their lives. You shouldn't be governing that, but there are other things that you are already governing, and so that is, what are the terms of your gift? What are the terms of your of the legacy that you're leaving, sort of certainly the financial and the tangible assets. You can sort of govern that. Governance is such a big word that people think it only applies, and I know that you're thinking probably that governance is really only going to apply to large governments and to large families, but I actually find that it applies to pretty much every small unit of a family.
So if a family starts out, let's say they have a business, restaurant or farm, whatever it might be. And by the time the planning is done, they have a foundation, they've got a CRT, they've got grits and grats, and all the things people do to make the tax numbers move around. So the before picture is mom and dad own the business, and the after picture is a lot of people have bits and pieces of different things. Is family governance, is the natural providence of family governance that after picture, when you look at all those flow charts and say there ought to be some coherence of how these things are managed to a purpose, or is that not the case?
Yes and no. Yes, that situation requires it, but I would say even in the prior situation, and I have noticed many people that think that just because they have a company, it's anything they can do with it. But in fact, that company probably has articles of incorporation, probably has bylaws. They probably already have legal rights and responsibilities behind that, even if it is just a, quote unquote, mom and pop shop. But no, people have to govern pretty much everything.
Okay. Well, thank you. That clarifies it for me.